major economies forum. Just wanted to ask you, why G20? If there is a forum to discuss climate finance or climate change, we already have, like G20 is an informal forum, we have major economies forum, which is an informal forum, but actually to discuss climate change. Okay, and India is part of that major economies forum. So is China. Every other country is part of major economies forum. With that, thank you again, and I can take questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chandrabhushanji. You brought this point very in a very strong manner that climate finance actually is a non-issue. Let me give you a sense of the figures and the statistics which are involved. At best, it can go to $100 billion. Do you have an idea what is the cost of economic cost of the floods in Pakistan? It's more than $500 billion. Despite the fact that lives in southern part of the world are less costlier, it's 500 US dollars. Do you have an idea, 500 billion US dollars. Do you have an idea that what is the response package of G20 for financial bailout of banks and financial institutions? Is 60 trillion US dollars, which is as compared to the climate finance number of $100 billion is nothing. So climate finance actually is a non-issue, and it's very disappointing that it has lured less developed countries, small island nations, and created a wedge between the G77 solidarity. So G20, whether we agree it's a right platform or not, but there is a need for engagement with G20 also on these issues. That is definitely a point. Jyoti, may I invite you to please share your thoughts.
Myself, Jyoti Deka. Afternoon, fellow panelists and ladies and gentlemen. I'm actually from policy candidates, and being in the private sector, I think I'll be a little milder in my views and more optimistic, I guess. So, yeah.
Sorry, why should private sector be milder?
Because we need finance. So, yeah, to begin with, I'd like to share something that I came across in the internet a few days back. I saw this little video of dolphins and elephants who actually recognize themselves in the mirror, like human would do. And scientists make this little experiment, like they put a little mark on this dolphin and the elephant, and the first thing they do is like they go to the mirror and check themselves out, as would, a normal human would do. So I guess the point about whole climate finance or climate change is, we are not the only smart people, species around here. So yeah. So on climate finance itself, I think Mr. Nanda and Mr. Bhushan has given a fair view of the whole framework itself, and I took the liberty of putting it in a diagram. It talks about three specific elements, those being agents, sources of funds, and how those funds are being used. Most of these were covered in the previous presentations, so I'll skip that and then look at where G20 fits. So G20 fits basically in terms of its own development action plan around 4 agents. I would like to say that. The first one being multilateral cooperation, which is in form of probably the World Bank. Then aligning itself around UNFCCC, sorry about the typo, and maybe looking at private sector as well. The fourth remit is mostly, undecided. So as I said, in the development action plan, there's a consensus summary where G20 talks about catalyzing funds either through MDBs or through private sector participation. And it does talk about innovative sources of finance, such as the financial transaction tax, which Mr. Nanda has highlighted in his presentation. So I try to look at the convergence around those three organizations, G20 versus World Bank and UNFCCC, because one of the open questions that I was asked by Bhanu was how does convergence can be met. I look at three areas, the sources of funds, cooperation among these three bodies, and the investment area where fund is going to be targeting at. In terms of sources, both G20 and UNFCCC talks about fossil fuel subsidy redeployment, financial transaction tax, and carbon tax on international transport. So that's the kind of the area of a cross section. And then in terms of cooperation, I found that actually World Bank stands in 17 of 23 policy mandates of G20, whereas which doesn't feature any of the UN bodies. So I mean, there might be some indication there, where it's converging. In terms of investment area, G20 is pretty much focused on biofuel and climate-resistant agriculture, which they talk big about. World Bank has this climate investment fund, which probably most of us are familiar with. But I think the area gets really interesting in terms of what UNFCCC is trying to do in terms of fast start finance as well as long-term finance, which Mr. Bhushan kind of highlighted in his speech. In fast start finance is being mobilized mostly through development assistance, and I think the figure till 2010 was standing at 40%. Being mobilized of that 30 billion. But I think Durban saw a lot of movement around long-term finance, where developed countries would mobilize something like 100 billion, of the order of 100 billion from 2020, and will be focused on adaptation and mitigation activities. So just a summary of what I could find out in my research. Then I make this presentation a more India specific. I want to talk about one of the mitigation activities where climate finance can be channeled, and maybe we as a country can have a niche area. So that's where the optimism was. I think that's why I quoted the optimism part of being in a private sector. So economists, I think they talk about these fancy terms about abatement cost, marginal abatement cost, which is pretty much reducing this extra unit of carbon emission. And what it does is it pretty much fixes the prices of carbon on it. I think this presentation also, this presentation was taken from G20 climate finance reports. So it kind of lays out where exactly the investment on low carbon areas should be. As you can see, energy efficiency is clearly the low-hanging fruit. I think followed by renewables and commercially unproven technologies. So I look at that, and then I look at IEA data on the emission intensity among G20 countries. I think it's kind of the presumption that economic growth is followed by, bigger energy needs, and hence probably the nation's, emission intensity. And if you look at the first curve, you'd see that, we lay below the G20 average, first of all, on a historic term, since 2000. And in terms of the second graph, what it talks about is it overlays emission per capita as well as emission per unit of GDP in PPP terms among the G20. Now, I think India's stance on most of these international forum has been, our per capita emission is low compared to the world average, so we should do less. And which probably took a beating in Durban as well. But when I look at emission intensity per unit of GDP growth, in terms of PPP terms, it's still lower than most of the G20 countries and lower than the world average. So maybe we can reconceptualize the whole argument around climate equity around emission intensity rather than per capita emission. So that's talking about the numbers, but I think I want to conclude with what should be the stance within G20 for us, India as a country. I think we probably have a strong case for building this climate equity argument around emission intensity per unit of GDP. We seem to be doing better than most of these other countries with less. And then maybe we need more technology innovation, because in 2010, out of 550 billion investment in sustainable energy, only 6 billion were targeted on efficiency and low carbon tech services. So, one area that we seem to be doing well compared to the other G20. So I think that could be one area where we could delve more into. So yeah, I'm from a firm called C Kinetics. We are a startup consulting and venture capital firm based in Delhi. So I'll just do the sales pitch as well. So yeah, so we look at 3 areas, one being investment, of course, and then looking at the market imperatives and technology imperatives. We also have a media outlook called Sustainability Outlook. So feel free to log into www.sustainabilityoutlook.in and see what experts has to say. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. One thing about sources of climate finance I would like to flag for you to wonder, that Cancun agreements as well as Durban package, as well as Khan's declaration of G20 last year, talks about mobilizing private, public, and innovative sources of funding for climate finance. Civil society organizations all over the world have great reservations in private finance being mobilized for climate finance. Why? Because we believe that private capital is not suited for climate finance. Most of the FDI inflows in 2010 have moved only into 9 to 10 middle-income countries. There has been not a single low-income countries or small island nations where FDI have moved. Another thing about market-based mechanism and CDM projects, 90% of the CDM projects are concentrated in China, India, Brazil, and Mexico. So unless you have a secure, continued public source of finance, the climate finance will remain a greater bogey. So with that, I open the floor for discussion. We have about, say, 20 minutes time to ask questions and comments. So what we do is to ask for questions, and then we can take response from the panelists. So please identify yourself. Please say whom do you want to, your question is addressed to whom, and then please be brief. Thank you very much. Yeah, please. You.
Yes, I'm Abhishek from Delhi University, and I would like to address this question to Nitin. So basically, I mean, Mr. Bhushan sir has made the whole point redundant, but just for argument's sake, EU has already started imposing carbon credit tax on airliners, which basically land in EU airports. Now, don't you think such unilateral decisions make G20 redundant? As in, and also by not acting on climate finance, isn't G20 anyway getting crippled? And the third issue that I would like to raise is that because of this, don't you think that this leads to greater bilateral trade, as in developing countries with more bargaining power can actually ban their airlines from not paying this carbon credit? I mean, China has already done that. China has already said to all their airliners that you do not have to pay. You are banned from paying this. So don't you think that creates a very bilateral kind of, that's
Hello, sir. My question is basically, you had cleared very much in a good way that the basic problem is not a finance. Climate finance is not a problem because we are having lots of ways like emission trading, we're having green accounting, in many other ways the finance can be managed in easily way. The problem is what at Durban also the problem raised and stopped at the point of equity in developed in the developing nation. Basically, the point to do we need any kind of governments, international governments that do need to check for equity kind of thing, because those who have done past emissions, they are not relied that they are going to do something for what they are doing right now, and they are that is all forcing on the developing countries itself. Second thing is, we talked about per capita emissions of India. It's what I think it's a kind of hoax, because we are only 1.2 billion people and it's calculated for only 1.2 billion. So it's not small. We are having a huge chunk of emissions for it from India itself, what I think. And thirdly, it's like my perspective, it's for climate, we should move ahead from G20. It's need to go for internationally to go move ahead from G20. Thank you so much.
I have a question to Chandrabhushan, sir. Firstly, I've been seeing that many of us have been using the term negotiations for climate change. And as you rightly said, that there's no such issue as climate finance. It's more about a climate issue. So is it learning or is it negotiation? Why are we negotiating for the atmosphere which we are sharing in a common space? So is it about learning from each other? Secondly, you said that it is us who has to stand out and tell the world that what we can do. So for me, it's a concern that in G20, do we have this learning space within the countries about what technology we can share to reduce the climate emissions? And India on its own, what is it doing? Is it communicating well enough? I know that there's something happening in G20, there's something happening in Durban, but how far the policies are affected at local level? I have no idea about that. How G20 is communicating or how Durban Summit is communicating to local people. We don't know what is happening. We just know that there are some negotiations happening, but how far it is going to implement in the root level to the rickshawalas, to the truck people, to us for a common man, we have no knowledge about that. So how do you deal with that, and what do you suggest G20 to do this?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Utkarsh. I'm from the Young India Fellowship. I have a question to Mr. Nityanand. So when you talked about that the developed countries should allocate a certain funds to the developing countries by virtue of their having economic powers, and because they have a lot of, they spend a lot on military, so they can partake with, like they can give a certain fund. But don't you think that this is an emotional argument, that because you have a lot of money, you can spend a little? And the problem with this argument is that this can never be sustainable. It's okay that they'll give it one time, even if they do, although they won't, but even if they do, you'll again not change the best practices of industries, or you'll again not attack the problem at its root. It's a very, I think, a superficial approach to, and I think like all of us, me included, would vouch that the developed countries should say, do this, but are we really attacking the problem this way?
Anybody else? Yeah.
Hey, this is Sachin. I would like to ask a question to Chandrabhushan sir. Sir, you said that we need to do something about climate change rather than climate finance. So actually what you have told us that that developing countries are really more concerned about that, and they are doing, in fact, India is doing much better than others. So what is the motivation for what can be the motivation for the developed countries to do that? If it is not a finance, suppose we increase the value of that carbon credit rating, that is, you told us that the price is €3. If we increase that, because developing countries are earning this carbon credits and they are purchasing. So can't that help the developing countries to invest more, and maybe like that? Maybe some suggestions. What will be the motivation for them if there is no finance related? Then what will be the motivation for the developed countries to adopt that? And in fact, some of the reports says that climate change is going to affect the temperate zone more, that is developing countries, India, and maybe in that belt. Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, lady there.
Hello, I'm Soumya. I'm from Young India Fellowship. My question, rather discussion, is with Mr. Chandrabhushan. So I do agree with the point that self-sufficiency and our burden on ourselves is one way we can make people responsible. But let us look at the point of equity and what nations talk about at a national level. Equity in India, when you say energy consumption per capita, would not make sense because 60% of the villages do not have electricity at all. Having said that, we also know that if we compare on an individual scale, America's middle class person consumes 5 times more electricity than India, and in fact more now. So do you think that there is an international level requirement of establishing a human right kind of a thing on electricity consumption rather than going on a national scale, which becomes very macroscopic? And also, do you think there's a requirement of a microscopic level industry industry norms, as you said? And if there is, how should we go about it?
We can take a couple of more questions, I believe. Yeah, lady here.
The question is addressed to Mr. Chandrabhushan. I wanted you said that it's either climate change or it's the money. I wanted to know that how much can we expect the USA to change its stand in the coming years, given its history? We know we need them to take action, but can we really expect them to? Because I don't think we really can.
Yeah.
Sir, I just want to ask a very simple question as a student of international environmental law. What will be the fate of Green Environment Fund and Montreal multilateral funds after coming this Green Climate Finance funds? And one more thing that what we can expect from the upcoming Doha conference for sir, I would specifically ask that what will the fate of Kyoto Protocol, because in 2012 everybody knows that Kyoto is going to shut down. So, sir, anyone can answer this.
Gentleman in the back. Yeah, just last question.
There's a lot of questions now.
Last question. Okay. We have
Otherwise,
sort
I'm
of
going to forget all that was asked before.
Hello, I am Ajay Pratap from BIT Patna. And sir, I just want to say, Nityanand sir asked how much amount would be sufficient. I was work with No2CO2 startup at IIM Ahmedabad, and my project was to develop a marginal abatement cost curve. So that is a global mapping of opportunity, that how much abatement potential will cost, and we get a sense that which action would be sufficient and best economic fitted to meet the challenges of particular level of emission. So we can sense that how much money would cost, and also no one discuss about the special drawing rights of IMF SDRs, and in just after 2008 economic meltdown, in just 5th month, IMF collected $250 billion to as a out of them, he gave $165 billion to developed countries. And if these funds and the developed countries may get these same, may generate these same funds from the world markets at the same interest rate. And if these funds be channeled through UNFCCC for generating green climate fund, it will be very good action. And so G20 is a good platform for discussing climate finance, and we must be optimized. Not what we have not done in past 20 years, we may do in next 4 or 5 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, before I respond to questions coming from floor, I had a comment with Jyoti's one particular suggestion you made about GDP, energy intensity of GDP.
Yeah, as equity plus
equity. I would rather strongly object to that, because GDP is a very it's a mystification made by economists that every profession does. You don't really know what GDP is all about. When your mother cooks food for you, no GDP is created. When you have that food in hotel, GDP is created. So essentially you're saying, if your mother is cooking, she has to manage without energy, And if restaurant is cooking, they will get a lot of energy. Sorry, we follow a different policy in India. We have LPG, which is priced at lower level for domestic consumption and use. For restaurants, we charge higher prices. So that is something we should follow here also. Okay, aviation tax. Three things that I will talk about aviation tax. First, is aviation tax going to reduce emission? That's not beyond questioning, because like any production or any operation, you have one fixed cost component, one variable cost component. In emission also, you have fixed cost. When you have made an aircraft, you consume a lot of energy in the process. Now, if you say that that aircraft is not efficient, so I would not allow it to fly, ground it, all that energy that it consumed in the process of production is gone, right? You have already made the fixed investments. So we don't really know on a life cycle basis what is the exact level how long I should run an aircraft, because it has been made after all. So that level is not known to us. When fixed cost, variable cost are involved, you cannot only look at variable cost, ignore the fixed cost. So when you say that energy efficient aircrafts will be only allowed to fly or pay penalty, you are essentially saying that I don't bother about the energy that has been consumed. It is rather to push airlines to buy new aircrafts, and that will consume a lot of energy in the process, right? One thing. Second thing is that it's like we clean the home and put all our garbage on the road, right? We do that in India, that's quite common. You say that, okay, a flight from Delhi to Brussels, you pay tax, but a flight from Delhi to Hong Kong or Singapore or even Washington would not pay anything. So what Indian Airlines will do? Put the more efficient flights, aircrafts in European route and all non-efficient, in that route. Then you have exemption for small airlines within Europe. So when the European airlines, what will they do? The less efficient aircrafts would be flight between, say, Paris and Brussels, not in longer routes. Though they will also avoid. It's like we stopped 15-year-old vehicle flying in Delhi. All of them went to UP and all other states, and they're flying, right? So would you want that? And yes, it also creates problem that you take any unilateral decision that countries will find way out, and China is already said. So how do you deal with that? Nobody knows. Learning. I'm sure it's not about learning. Chandrabhushan made it very clear. It's about economics, it's about politics, it's about geopolitics. It's not about learning. But what is happening, in case of technology transfer, you see that in terms of, disaster in India also, even the basic supplies, the suppliers take advantage of that, and they charge high prices. They have no mercy for the people in distress. Now you have created a situation where you say that the climate is in distress, you need this technology, and I want to sell this technology at very high prices. Would you like that? Or would you say that, okay, we're in distress, please say that you give the technology. I'm not saying you make losses, you make profit, but please see that you don't make excessive profit. This is where we have to go. But I think what we're discussing in G20 is the opposite. As much as profit you can make, taking advantage of.
Give that money to you.
Give that money to you. It's not, all of us might be often chased by the banks here that take loan. We don't run after loan. Because if you run after that, often you get into expenses that you don't require to make. And know a lot of farmers in India committing suicides. This is also one of the reasons that they make expenses which they should not be making. Kyoto Protocol, yes, I don't think it's going to die, but yes, it's not going to liquid oxygen mein dal do, jeene nahi dega, marne denge. It's kind of that situation. You talked about estimate. I said, yes, mitigation is, you know how much money is required. It's not perfect estimate, but you have some indication. But adaptation by very nature, You don't know how much cyclone is going to hit, how many tsunami is going to hit, how much flood is going to happen. So because of that, the huge lack of uncertainty around, you don't know about adaptation. It is very difficult to make any estimate. Okay. One question was about emotions. Yes, I think human beings, in fact, all animals have emotions. That's what make us different from non-living things. So we should not dump emotions. But I will ask you another question. You are driving on road in Delhi, you hit a person, kill somebody who's the only earning member of his family. And then you are asked to pay some compensation to his family because there is no earning member. It's an emotional question or it is something else?
But the Western counterpart would not say that they have killed, but they would say, I'm not saying I say that,
yeah.
But the Westerners, the developed countries say that they have provided a technological platform for the developing countries to copy and prosper. And that is actually not intellectually wrong.
That's not had been done.
What happens? A lot of the technologies which come up in the West are adapted in the Indian context, and we say that yes, we've done it. So they would say that they've provided a technological platform, and we would say that they have ruined us.
No, my argument is more about adaptation, less about mitigation. I mean, I agree with him that mitigation we are doing, but what happens to sub-Saharan African people who has no role in climate change whatsoever, and they are the worst sufferers? So those who are committing this crime should compensate them or not? I think that's not an emotional question only. It's a question of liability, fixing liability.
Nityananda, one thing that I would like to drive